to pass it in as many countries as possible. When we talk about working against human trafficking and abolishing human trafficking around the world, we need to pay attention to the research and pay attention to the impact of legislations around the world and the impact that these have in abolishing human trafficking around the world. So I'm going to share some slides with you. You're going to see yourselves first. And so very quickly, we have about 10 minutes left. And if anybody has any questions after this for any of the presenters, I'm going to leave some time. So to abolish human trafficking, we must abolish prostitution. And a lot of people have a very hard time with this issue, especially because the myths around prostitution have been so strong. But the reality is that around the world, women and children are being exploited in commercial sexual exploitation that we also know as prostitution. And if we want to make a huge dent in human trafficking, and especially human trafficking of women and children, we need to start thinking about abolishing prostitution. A lot of people think that that's impossible, that it's something that has been going on throughout the ages. And most of all, there are two arguments today that are very strong for keeping the commercial sexual exploitation market or business. As Ronnie was telling us, human trafficking is a business. This is commercial exploitation of women and children. And one of the very large, big arguments that the pimp lobby has around the world to lobby for the existence and the legalization of prostitution around the world is around the area of choice. And so they have made a big argument around the area of choice and human rights. So stating that women have the right to prostitute themselves if they want to. And if they are making the choice to prostitute themselves, then we as a society need to respect that. And we at Rescue Freedom and at CAP International, the Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution around the world, and other huge organizations that have joined the cause, are constantly saying, is it really a choice? Do you need to really think about this argument? When we talk about choice, we talk about having opportunities or different things that we can choose from. But most women and girls are in prostitution because of the lack of options, the lack of choices. So as I did my research for my doctorate and studied so much on this issue, the experiences that women, that we know from studying the testimonies of survivors and also the research done around the world, we know that girls in prostitution consistently show that they have either been in government care as children, they have been abused as children. 80% of the girls that I interviewed in my country, which is Mexico, entered prostitution before the age of 18, which automatically makes it human trafficking. Many were coerced into prostitution by huge promises of a better life. And we know that women do not choose prostitution. I mean, you ask any six-year-old around the world, poor or rich, what she wants to be when she grows up, and you will not find one that says she wants to grow up to be a prostitute. Most of these women are either trafficked into prostitution, or they're coerced into prostitution, or they choose prostitution as a survival mechanism. Prostitution is never a choice. what we have seen is that prostitution is the absence of choice, because most of the women, that overrepresentation of poor, migrant, marginalized populations in prostitution, is the number is just incredible. I mean, and also the fact that more than 80% of girls in prostitution at the moment were sexually abused as children. And this is a big, big issue around the world, especially in my country. We are the #1 country in the world for sexual abuse of girls. And so that's a big deal that we need to start addressing. We cannot address human trafficking as an isolated issue. We have to make sure that we are dealing with other issues. Like I just said, you know, the foster care system, the government assistance, child abuse, marginalized migrant populations, poverty. These things are things that we need to be looking at, we need to be paying attention to. If we say we want to eradicate human trafficking, we need to start working on eradicating those vulnerabilities that make women more prone to be coerced into a life of prostitution. And not only that, once they are engaged in prostitution through commercial sexual exploitation, it is almost impossible to get out. Only 2% of women are able to get out. And not only because of the traffickers keeping them in, but also because of the normalization of society, because they have no other options once they're in there. They haven't studied, they have no education, sometimes they don't know the language of the country where they are. They have no means of advancing in society at all. And so there's just no opportunity. Once you're there, you're probably there for life, or coming out and reinserting yourself in prostitution rings very easily, because it's almost impossible to get out. And once you get out with an array of tremendous problems, especially PTSD, and of course, health issues, psychological issues, emotional issues, etc. Now, the Protocol of Palermo that we use to base or found all legislation regarding human trafficking says that every state should discourage the demand that fosters all forms of exploitation. And one of the things that has not been visible in the fight against trafficking is that demand piece. Sex buyers are the ones that foster commercial sexual exploitation of women and children. Sex buyers have a responsibility. So we've paid a lot of attention to the traffickers, the pimps, the procurers, but we have decided that the sex buyer has no responsibility in this issue, and that is just a big lie. And if states don't start paying attention to this issue, there's just no way of advancing. So this is why we have chosen to support the Nordic model, equality model, abolitionist model. It has a lot of names now. I just call it the Nordic model. The Nordic model of legislation against human trafficking has 3 musts. First of all, the decriminalization of prostituted persons. All prostitution equals violence, and we believe that women and children should not be criminalized for prostituting themselves or for being caught in prostitution rings, because that is just violating them again. That is more violence on them. And that is why we have a hard time with the US type law that also criminalizes women and children. Many adolescent girls are serving time in juvenile detention centers because of prostitution, and this should just not be. So at the same time, we do not believe in the legalization of prostitution that puts women in more difficult situations when it comes to violence and other things that I don't have time to go into right now. The second point is governments need to have public policies related to holistic exit programs for prostituted people. They have to offer other opportunities for people coming out of prostitution. And the last and most important piece is the criminalization of the sex buyers. So for the last 15 years, Sweden was the first country to adopt this law, and we have a lot of research of how effective it is. Today, it's Sweden, Iceland, Norway, France, Canada, Israel, Ireland, and Northern Ireland have adopted Nordic modeled types of law. The French law is the strongest one. And the Israeli law, which is the newest one, is modeled on the French law. And the nice thing about the French law is that it is very strong in putting money into exit programs and support programs for prostituted women. So that is most of my work right now is dedicated to lobbying for such a law in my country, in my region, in Latin America. And so a lot of people say that it won't work in Latin America. I totally disagree. I believe that we can work with the context. And one of the most important things is to follow the 9.5 of Palermo that says that the culture and education pieces have to work together with the legislative piece. So we know that when we have laws, cultures, and mentalities and mindsets change, but everything has to happen together. So the education piece is one of the most important pieces. We need to go into colleges and universities and talk to people about the myths of prostitution, the violence in prostitution, and the incredible harm that commercial sexual exploitation does to women and children, which then harms all of society. Because when we normalize violence, then we normalize all types of violence, and we can just not permit that in our countries. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. If somebody has a question, we're supposed to step out at 9 p.m. It is 9 p.m. now. But if somebody has a question, they can always reach us at the different organizations. My email is rita@rescuefreedom.org. I would be very happy to answer questions or talk to you about this issue. I know that you can reach Patti at Fundación Camino a Casa, and Rosi Orozco is always available to answer any of your questions or walk with you at comisionunidos.org. So any of these organizations and would be very happy to answer any of your questions or anything that you would like to know more about the issue. I think most of the people here are friends already that have been walking with us for a while, but thank you again for listening to me again. And back to you, Patti.
Thank you very much for everybody, and it was very nice to have this time with you. And any question you can send it by email for all of us. Thank you. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you. I don't know who's next.
Bye.
But
bye.